and this is module 7. The topic that we'll be looking at in this module is conflict resolution in international relations. I used to say that we can be discussing about conflict resolution and not try to link it to international relations, because some notable and suitable examples that we have can be used to illustrate or expand on this course are majorly from at the international level. So we have to address the conflict resolution in international relations. That is conflict when there is conflict resolution between at the international stage. So now let's look at the contents of the module. We have the meaning of international relations. That's very sure. We'll be looking at the meaning of international relations and probably to different perspectives and approaches according to different scholars. And also we'll be looking at conflicts at international level. We can compare conflicts at domestic level, where we have within a society, within a region. We can compare that to that of the international level, that is between different countries, two or more countries. So now we also be looking at international conflicts. What do we mean by international conflicts, with major examples? Then we also look at the major types of international conflicts, where we have different examples of Russia versus Ukraine. We try to select the recent ones that we can easily relate to for this course, so that we can have a proper understanding of what the topic entails. So now let's look at the introduction. Conflict resolution in an international organization, in an international relations, it refers to the systematic efforts by states, not only by states but also by international organizations and non-state actors, to de-escalate and manage and also ultimately transform disputes that cross national borders, whether they stem from territorial claims, resource competition, ideological differences, or security dilemma. So this definition is trying to tell us that irrespective of any way that the conflict is coming through, or the medium that it is coming through, or the types of conflicts, be it territorial disputes and not, so far it is erupting between two different national states, and this can only lead to international conflicts. So conflict resolution in international level is what is bringing down all those the conflicts from two different independent states at the international level, that is bringing it down. So now let's continue. As the global system lacks a centralized authority capable of imposing binding decisions, diplomatic negotiation, mediation, and peace-building mechanisms become essential tools for preventing the escalation of tensions into armed conflict and for fostering durable peace. Scholars emphasize that effective conflict resolution hinges on a nuanced understanding of power as metrics, cultural context, and the underlying interest of the parties involved, as well as the capacity to create mutually acceptable frameworks that address both immediate grievances and long-term grievances. So now let's look at the meaning of international relation as an act. We have these are the approaches, or the approaches to which we can define international relations. We have meaning of international relation as an act. So international relation is the study of relation among nations. Just very simply, and very direct definition. It's the study of relation among nations. That is the study of relationship between two or more nations. It could be official, it could be non-official, because it is very important among its peers in the academic discipline. So we can give two definitions to the study of international relation. So one, international relation as an act, as I've stated initially, and under that we have when we are looking at international relation as an act, this definition, this perspective is old. It all began when human beings started to interact among themselves in antiquity. It started from the river valley, the valleys of River Tigris and River Euphrates, and the Nile River in Egypt. So in ancient civilizations that took place in Baconi, Assyria, and Egypt, international relation as an act started in this area. International relation as an act, relation among nations were conducted by the princes, but the coming of the First World War between 1914 to 1919 took end to the prince alone being envoys. So let's look at this. Was because scholars came up to challenge the act of making princes alone or long being ambassador, and it was discovered that the mismanagement of international relations among these blue blood caused the First World War. Therefore, scholars concluded that international relations as an art was too important to be handled by the princes alone. So the explanation that we are trying to what can be derived from this discussion and explanation is that international as an art is an old way of international relations where we have the monarchs, where we have the prince and the princess representing their nation in international affairs and in keeping relationship. So by doing this, scholars have been able to deduce or come to the conclusion that the tasks were too big or too much for the shoulder of the princes. So it can be said that this is mainly what was one of the problems that led to the First World War. So now let's look at international relation as an academic study. That's the second perspective that we can define international relation. It can be viewed from the point of view as an academic discipline or pursuit. So now, international relation as an academic discipline is relatively new. Anything that we have to do with the study of relation among nations were studied under 4 traditional disciplines. These this study include history, philosophy, economics, and law. As these are the 4 traditional disciplines that has to do with anybody that will be representing the country. Will be representing the country at the international level must be from the history, philosophy, economics, and law. Not until the late 19th century and early 20th century of international relations as an independent course didn't come forth. International relations started to be studied as a discipline in the American and British University as a course immediately after the end of the First World War. Scholars started to study the course. Scholars started to study the course of First World War, which gave birth to the study of international relations as a course of study. So until what we are trying to establish here is that or not until the late 19th and 20th century. Before then, people that are being considered for international relations and international affairs are people that study history, philosophy, economics, and law. But not until now that we now have international relations as a course on its own in different universities across the board. So now let's look at other scholar definition of international relations. According to Edlibu 1977, he's a classical realist and liberal institutionalist. He defined international relations as the study of the interaction among states and of the effect of this interaction on the behavior of states in condition of anarchy. That's according to Edbu. So Robert and Joseph also viewed international relations. They are liberal and liberalism institutionalists. They defined international relations as the concerns interactions among states and non-state actors across national boundaries, when at least one actor is not an agent of a government or an intergovernmental organization, as well as the study of transnational and transgovernmental relations. So also Kenneth 1979, according to him, international politics or international relations can be defined as the realm of power, of struggle, and of accommodations. So now let's look at the conflict at international level. What are we going to say about conflict at the international level? So it can also be called international conflict, which can be defined as a situation in which 2 or more actors, we are talking about these actors, it is usually states, but also non-state armed groups, terrorist organizations, or coalitions. They come together to pursue incompatible goals through actions that involve the threat or the use of armed forces across national borders, or that seriously risk escalation to armed forces. So Kenneth 1979 also, international conflict arises from according to Kenneth, international conflict arises from the anarchic structure of the international system. Because there is no central authority to enforce rules, states must rely on self-help, leading to security dilemmas and inevitable conflicts over power and survival. And Jack and Thompson, they also define international conflict as a relationship between two or more states in which at least one side perceives a threat to its vital interest and is willing to use force or the threat of force to defend or advance those interests. So let's look at some notable relatable international conflicts that we can address. So we have Russia and Ukraine. I believe we can easily relate to this as it is just something that is still fresh not that long, and it's still probably ongoing. So now let's look at Russia and Ukraine. The Russian invasion of Ukraine was launched on February 24, 2022, which marked a dramatic escalation of the broader Russo-Ukrainian war that had simmered since Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. The early phases of this invasion, from February to April 2022, saw a rapid but ultimately failed Russian gains. Russia was trying to gain something but failed, which exposing vulnerabilities in Moscow's planning and logistics. So Russian troops encircled Kiev but faced fierce urban warfare, ambushes and logistical breakdowns, including fuel shortages and low morale, leading to a humiliating withdrawal by late March after atrocities like the Bucha massacre surfaced, galvanizing a global outrage. From the middle of 2022 through 2023, the war evolved again into a brutal stalemate characterized by artillery threats, drone warfare, and incremental territorial shifts, with Ukraine launching audacious counter-offensives which humiliated Russian forces. So in September 2022, Kiev's lightning Kharkiv offensive reclaimed over 12,000 square kilometers, including Izium and Balaklia, collapsing Russian lines and prompting annexations of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and the likes, and the regions Moscow did not fully control as desperate power plays. So the war's humanitarian and economic toll defies comprehension, displacing 8 million internally and forcing 6 to 7 million refugees abroad. Europe's largest crisis since World War II, with over 13,300 civilians killed and 21,700 injured by middle of 2025 per UN data, according to UN. So this is a recent crisis that we can use as an example when we are talking about conflict at the international level. This is between two neighboring countries, Russia and Ukraine, over, although it seems to look like territorial dispute or war or conflict, but we know it was more than that. It was a conflict for power and all. Let's look at also we'll be looking at Israel-Palestine conflict. Or the Israel-Palestine conflict is one of the longest running and most intractable disputes in modern international relations. It is fundamentally a struggle over the same land between two national movements, Zionism, that is the Jewish self-determination, and the Palestinian Arab nationalism. Its modern phase began with the 1947 to 1949 Palestine War, which was triggered by the UN General Assembly Resolution 181 November in 1947, which proposed partitioning British mandate Palestine into Jewish 56% and Arab 44% states, with Jerusalem internationalized. From 1949 to 1967, the conflict remained frozen, but violence and along the armistice lines. While both sides prepare for the next round, as of December 2025, the conflict remains deadlocked with no meaningful negotiation in sight. There is no any view or any sense of peace coming there. Any sense of peace movement or negotiation in sight. The two-state solution, once the international consensus has been hollowed out by facts on the ground, 146 settlements, 140 outposts, 140 outposts, settler-only roads, and the separation will have carved the West Bank into disconnected cartons. So in conclusion, the study of international relations has evolved from an activity once monopolized by princes and envoys to a rigorous academic discipline that draws on history, philosophy, economics, law, and a plurality of theoretical lenses to be able to understand the complex interactions among states and non-state actors in an anarchic global system. Different scholars, such as Bu, Cohen and Nie, Watts, and the likes, they have offered complementary and competing definitions that highlight power, institutions, security dilemmas, and gender power relations, while contemporary frameworks distinguish between a relative peace chain, incremental reduction in violence, and absolute peace, a visionary state in which conflict becomes unimaginable and structural violence is eliminated. So now, the Russia-Ukraine war exemplifies a clash of realist security concerns and liberal institutional expectations, while the Israel-Palestine dispute underscores the limits of liberal peace-building and enduring force of ethno-national identities, settlement expansion, and great power in sustaining a protected